Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Startup State of Mind podcast. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Dilla Anindita. She's the co-founder and chief product officer of SPUN. SPUN is a modern global permit and visa platform, and they're transforming a traditionally painful and stressful process into something tech-enabled and refreshingly simple and easy, right? It's one of those things that you hear about, and you're like, oh, yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? Like, I wish someone could help me, get a visa or make it faster or easier. Before starting SPUN, Dilla built her product chops at companies like Cookpad, Grab, and Line, leading teams and scaling products across Asia. I know Dilla because we're part of the same AppWorks batch. Shout out to AppWorks. Dilla, thank you so much for being here. How
Doing
are you?
great. And how are you, Chris?
Doing well here. Now I've always felt that product is one of the most misunderstood functions in a startup. Everyone has their own way of building it, and it shifts dramatically depending on the type of company and stage you're in. I've spent some of my career building product, and someone like you who's been both a product leader and now a founder as well. I'm like super excited to like talk to you and dig in to like how you guys build product at SPUN. Shall we just jump straight in?
Let's do it.
Sure. Uh, First of all, could you just share like what SPUN is, right? I think for me, like I have like the background of what SPUN is. I've checked out your product, but for those who haven't, could you share a little bit more about SPUN? And I'd also love to know like your founding story. I think I always ask founders like this question, and I think it's super interesting to me and on the audience. So if you could you
Yes,
just
for
share a
sure.
little bit?
So SPUN is actually an acronym of Solusi Permit untuk Netizen. So it's like a permit solutions for netizens of Indonesia. And essentially our thesis is simple. We're simplifying visa creation process with AI and automation. So what was previously a very tedious process to be something very seamless with technology. The more you use it, the faster it gets. Simple as that. And the founding story is pretty funny. So both me and Krista work abroad before, travel abroad very, very often. And there was this point in my life where I was working in the UK for 4 years. I moved to Japan. And in my first day in Japan, I got laid off. And thanks to my shitty passport, I can't even go back to the UK to say goodbye to my friends. I only have a few months in Japan, and that's when I realized, like, oh my god, the world is so unfair for people with a shitty passport like me, right? And around the same time, Krista was visiting Japan as well, traveling before going through her summer school, and that's how we started to like caught up again and like decided like, look, I think we should start something together. Like we love working with each other before, we've known each other for like 9 years already now, and like she's bored at her own gig at that time, and I'm ready, like. So that thesis in mind is something that we both really struggle in, and for me especially at that time becomes something I really care about and I really want to solve. So that's eventually become the background story of like why we believe this is the right problem to solve, and how we start just like cracking and testing this more and more, and yeah, eventually finally become SPUN.
Yeah, I love to hear it, right? I love to hear like, people who have been close, right? Or they work together or they may be friends, right? And then they build companies together. I think you're like one of the lucky ones, right? I think there's a lot of single founders out there, solo founders out there who like wish they could find their soulmate, like you guys have. But no, thanks for sharing that. Let's dig deeper into the product a little bit, right? Could you just share like what a typical user's like experience is with SPUN, and what role does product actually play in your company, right? I'm sure there's some sort of trade-off between, okay, a service, there's some part that can be like operationalized, and there's some part that should be like productized and self-serve. And can you explain like what value it brings to your users, or what value you hope it brings to your users?
So essentially for a user, the jobs to be done that they're trying to achieve with SPUN is just one, really. I just want to get my visa done. But then when we break it down into phases, then you will find it a bit more clearer. Like it's actually several different phases to get there. from number one, figuring out the right visa for you, so the discovery part. Number two, actually getting it done, start uploading the document, preparing everything. And number three is basically like we call it the anxious moment, where people are waiting, we're figuring out whether it's going to be approved or not, what's going to happen next, and like until it's actually really, really finished, stamp on your passport and whatnot, right? So I think the role of the product at SPUN is trying to solve the jobs to be done one step at a time, from what is the most severe problem first, in which the first one is actually discovery, figuring out the right information, given that requirements change over time, and like every single website says different things. So we want to solve that, becoming the most reliable source of information first. So at SPUN, our product essentially show you very, very clearly, let's say if you're Indonesian living in the UK, applying for a visa to Japan, what exactly do you need, say as a student? Because it's going to be different if you're an employee or if you were children, for example, right? So that's information layer. Then getting it done, this is where initially everything was super manual. So imagine us like being our own agent, like Agent Dilla, Agent Krista, just like trying to get things done, until we eventually incorporate some aspects of technology, from creating a dashboard, automation for like verification and whatnot. And then we start working with like embassies, visa centers to get it done, right? So this is where another aspect that is still, even until today, quite manual and pretty heavy on that sense, right? So, and that's absolutely fine. So one thing I think startups should also embrace is that not all product will be perfect from the get-go. You cannot aim everything to be super duper automated, because some aspect will anyway, like it or not, will be manual until some points of time, and not until you have the confidence that this is product market fit. You should invest in like more and more automation in that sense. So hope that helps. So essentially it's the heart of SPUN. The role of the product is really
Hmm.
about like making sure that we really are solving the right problem. So every time a single visa is done through every version of our product experience, no matter how manual it is or how automated it is, we always try to like get feedback as early as possible and try to improve accordingly. So that's roughly how it looks like.
Got it. Yeah, I think you mentioned something there that was quite interesting, right? So like my mom, right? She books her tickets through a travel agent, right? And she knows she's paying more, right? She could just go to like the airline website and actually like book it herself if she wanted to, but she just needs someone to like help her, right? Like she doesn't know if like she what information that she needs, or like what like yeah, basically like she needs someone to tell her, okay, these are the times that are available. It's just like I think there's this huge portion of the population that will always need someone to help them, no matter what, right? So it's great that you guys are able to help so many people, take this crazy stressful experience and make it like easy and delightful.
Yep.
Wanted to ask a little bit more about the early days of building the SPUN product. I think you mentioned a little bit about how you guys were like agents yourself. Um, was there like a moment where you're like, okay, like we have this, right? Like we have product market fit. People are like kind of like signing up organically, or like, people have been like telling you how much they love their product. And how did you like measure or define it? And when did you realize that, okay, like this product is ready to kind of like scale up?
So there were three moments that leads to that. But before that, the funny thing is that every time you read everything about PMF, you will always have a script in mind, right? But what will realistically happen to your startup tends to be different with all the scripts that you have, because PMF is going to be very unique experience depending on your startup. And to be honest, when it's happening. So for example, the three pivotal moment for us. First is actually initially we were thinking about ideas that are not really visa related. So it's more about like, helping digital nomads with tax issues, because like they struggle with tax and whatnot. And then we went to Bali. We talked to the digital nomads in Bali. When they are talking about tax, they're basically running away and they're like, I don't want to talk about it, and like just stop and like leave us, right? But then when we talk to them about visa, they sit down, they grab their drinks, and then they were like, you know what? God damn it. 999 things. They just like start blabbering. This is when we realized like, okay, the problem is here and it's really underserved. So that's the first moment of like potential PMF, when we just show like some shitty Figma, prototype, and it's like, okay, this probably could be a thing, because people are so excited to know that there is a solution to their real problem with visas as a digital nomad back then. So second moment of our most kind of like pivotal moment is when we launch visas for Indonesians to go to abroad. So outbound visas from Indonesia. We start having a B2C customer that just refer their company. So like, hey, you know what? I love your service. I use it and like it gets to like a visa very easily, very quickly. Can my company maybe talk to you? So this is the moment when we realize like values can compound, and they are actually sharing it to they're referring for real to their companies when they love it, right? And the third pivotal moment is that when we finally have recurring purchases, because one of our thesis is that okay, maybe visa is not super frequent and maybe people are buying like what, once a year, but we have users that have purchased 4 or 5 visas already at SPUN, and there's not only like 1 or 2 of them. So it's actually a pretty sustainable, repeatable model that finally built us
Yeah.
the conviction that this is potentially PMF. And in our case, it's split to 3 different moments and could be very, very different for your case.
Yeah, I think there's obviously some people who travel all the time, right? You can think top of your head like businessmen or businesswomen, right? Who are like traveling, let's say, to like parts of all over the world doing business. They probably need to get a visa multiple times a year, right? So yeah, that's really cool to hear. Want to dig in a little bit more about your experience as a PM, right?
Yeah.
You worked at some of these amazing companies, right? Grab, Line, Cookpad, and now you're at SPUN, like an early stage startup, right? Those previous companies are quite big, right? And some of them are one of the biggest tech companies in Asia. How has building product differed across those companies, right? Especially considering that they are international, right? Some of them are in Japan or Korea, and SPUN is a local Indonesian company. Could you just share about how product the way that you build product changes over those
Yes.
companies?
So essentially, like the culture for like the West and the East, I would say is a little bit different as well. How I see a lot in East side companies that they're very, very data driven. So when I was at Grab or like Line, everything has to be very, very like specific. So say for example, like is it statistically significant experiment? You have to A/B test all the time. But also it was pretty big company, so we have the resources to A/B test to begin with, right? So they really, really love to make sure that things are going to go well before you really, really launch it. So like the discovery aspect, I think take a little bit longer in the sense that you have to test in production, launching to some extent, beta, alpha, whatever, until you get that conviction, right? So I think what I learned the most in this Eastern side company is a lot of testing. But to some extent, some of the decisions are often a bit top down as well. So how what I've noticed is that some companies in the East already have like a predefined goals in mind, like what exact features they want to build, and then the team basically like figure out how to test it as quick as possible, making sure that okay, this makes sense, doesn't make sense. So that I learned a lot, especially to my first 2 companies experience at Line and Grab, right? But then when I work at Cookpad, it's a little bit different. It's a bit on the Western side, I call it, where the emphasis is more on like product discovery that is a bit qualitative. So in a way that we do a lot of like user research, we do a lot of like first-hand experience. Like if you work at a cooking company, you have to cook kind of vibe. Where I learn a lot, a very different way of building products. So lots of like design thinking, a lot of like brainstorming sessions with the team. That is actually quite new in a way that the teams are deciding what gets built more. So essentially, like the authority belongs more to the members, if that makes sense. Which is very, very different in sense of a culture what I experienced before. So but also both are pretty strict in terms of like the cycle of development. So both of them are like bi-weekly sprint cycles, like classic like agile methodologies are already in place, right? But I would say that the teams are pretty big, even compared to like these days in Southeast Asia. Like a PM could be working with like 4 or 5 engineers, and maybe even more, right? So in that sense, what's really different with the experience today at SPUN, especially, we are very, very small early stage company. So the team is super lean. I work with like 3 full-time engineers as of now, and like we do like weekly cycle. Speed really, really matters, because unlike the past experience I had where you need a very strong conviction, statistically significant data to even launch something. At SPUN, a lot of times you have to deal with your intuition, right? Okay, this is going to work or not, balance with the gut feeling and data, and you have to prioritize speed. So if not, then you will lose, because that's what us as an early startup have, right? We have to be nimble and we have to be adaptive. So that's essentially some of the key differences. And what I would say is that lots of times PMs who jump into becoming founders, they don't see that coming. So they just assume that, oh, I will implement the perfect system I had in the big company I worked in before, but that's not going to work, because
Yeah.
the ecosystem is very dynamic. You're working in a different stage, and you have to change as well as a person. So we basically remove all the unnecessary ceremonies and just focus on delivering impact. So I would say those are the biggest shift that I feel
Yeah, that
so
was
far.
going to be like my next question, right? Like, how has your experience as a product manager shaped the way that you build a startup? Because I experienced the exact same thing that you just described, right? Where you found a company, and then you're like, oh, we're going to build a product the right way, right? And then we're going to, like, write amazing
Oh yeah,
PRDs, and we're going to be like, we're going to conduct, all the cadences perfectly, all the weekly meetings, everything. We're going to discuss everything, and then you end up not
yes,
building anything, right? Or it takes like forever to kind of like build anything, right?
yes.
So maybe you could just elaborate a little bit more into that. Like, did you have to like unlearn stuff like
Yeah.
me? Is that fair to
Yes,
say as
because I
well?
think I used to be one of the most perfectionist PM on earth. You can ask my ex-colleague at Grab, for example. My PRD was quite legendary back then. But these days, I'm like, you know what, folks? Our users are not going to see my PRD, but they're going to see your design and your engineering work live in production, right? So I put less effort on that, but I make sure people are aligned on the problem we want to solve. And we prioritize speed of improving, experimenting, and whatnot, because honestly, as early stage startup, if I mess it up with the current user base, it matters less than not being able to cater this big market that I have not yet acquired, right? And maybe that was not the case in the previous case when the company is already big enough to begin with. You have to really be careful in maintaining your existing user base, right? So there are reasons for each
Mhm.
decisions, and you have to be able to nimbly shift your mindset in each environment you're working on. So, for example, if for founders who then want to be a PM at, say, Google, then you have to also adjust. You need to be a bit more, structured in the way you think and execute. So, I keep on saying the word nimble because I think that's one of the key skill you really need as a PM to survive these days in transitioning between different kinds of roles in big companies, small, or even as a founder yourself.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. Totally agree with that. What do you miss the most about being a product manager now that you're a founder? Or is there like, do you not miss
Okay.
anything at all? Are you just glad that you're not doing that job anymore? Or I mean, maybe a better question is like, okay, what do you like about being a PM, and what do you like being about a founder? And is there anything that kind of like,
Yep. I
translates?
think what I like the most about being a PM is that I like being challenged. So I bring a thesis to a table and I work with a team that I don't necessarily, manage, the group of engineers, designers, whatever, and I have to get their buy-in, right? Like, this is something worth building. And as a founder, sometimes my team is a bit more like, oh yeah, you're the boss, like, so like, okay, we'll build this, and it's a bit like less challenging stuff, situation happening. Of course, I try to like encourage them to do that and hope to see that more and more. But that vibe of a PM with no power per se, I really miss, compared to like the days these days where like, I kind of like lead the team, right? But some things I do not miss, especially as a PM, is a big org setup, managing so many stakeholders, aligning between so many teams, especially in the case where there are already more than 30 PMs, I would say. That's, I would say, the magic number where things are becoming a bit overwhelming for me. And I don't really miss managing like so many stakeholders, everyone's asking questions and like just trying to get things done. So yeah, but as a founder, I think, like it or not, we will face the time where the team would grow anyway to that sense, and we might need to delegate. So just have to be prepared to get back to that mode again at some point. But for now, I'm happy with where I am, working with small team, nimble, and like just moving as fast as we can.
Yeah, I do think that like being a PM definitely helps you become a better
For sure.
founder, right? Because like not everyone has the luxury of having a CPO,
Yes.
right? As a founder, and building a tech startup, you are building a product, right? That is kind of like the core competency that you need to have. So yeah, could you just share maybe about how being a PM has helped you, right? I mean, obviously, I've seen the product, I've used the product, and it's super awesome and it's well designed and everything. But could you share about how your experience as a PM has helped you become like a
Yep.
better
I
founder?
think most importantly is that I'm very lucky that in the environment I had, Grab, Line, Cookpad, they're all really focused on product discovery, figuring out the right problem to solve. And that skill, essentially, I continue to hone and eventually becomes my own mode being a founder, which is as a PM, you tend to have a better product sense already built throughout your career because you've seen things working, you've seen things not working, you've hopefully shut things down because it doesn't work, you've hopefully seen something growing 10x. So those experiences you can't really buy. You need to really feel it to really be able to even build it for yourself. I believe. So this is what I call like the compounded learnings you have by just doing it. So those are the unfair advantages that PM have that perhaps not every single role might have the privilege to see it in the helicopter view. So for example, maybe devs can see it as they build it, designers can see it as they design it, but PM tends to have a bigger helicopter view of what is happening. So their sense is eventually becoming a bit better than the rest in that sense, becoming their advantage. So given that, I believe that it's quite natural for a good PM to be able to become a good founder. But unfortunately, we have to also be realistic. Not all PMs are good. Many are also just stuck in like a process cycle, managing projects in a sense, than like just moving Jira tickets around. These kinds are not going to survive. So if you're in this cycle, please do step up and try to improve your skills to really hone your product sense better. But once you have that, I think that is a really good asset to be proud everywhere. You want to be a more senior PM or like a founder, move on to another company, it will be indispensable.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like being a having been a PM, right, and being able to like prioritize, right, like know what's important like to do like now and when to shoot down like bad ideas, right? I think that's like the biggest thing, right? Because like being a founder, it's all about focus, right? It's like how do you work on things that actually matter
Yeah.
like now, and not work on the things that don't matter, right? And I think PMs are like a master at that, right? It's like, okay, like you question everything. It's like, okay, why should we build this, right? There might be like your co-founder maybe, right? Maybe, hey, we should build this, we should build that, right? And then PM's natural instinct is like, no, we shouldn't, right? So I think that part of being a PM is extremely valuable, I think. um, yeah, sure. Okay, so the next question is, I think you mentioned this earlier, right, about um, how you kind of distribute the product responsibilities maybe across your team members, or they all have kind of like a say in it, right? Or you want them to participate in the product management process. Um, and this question of like when to hire your first product manager is always controversial, right? And I think you're probably along those lines too, right now, where you're like, okay, maybe I should hire one. I don't know. Do you have a product
At the
manager?
moment, no.
Or no, right? But then this is probably something you think about, right? Like, when should I bring one in? Do you think that bringing a PM early is a good idea, or should product management responsibilities stay with like the founders or the early team members for as long as possible? And I know you're in a very unique position because you are a product manager by trade. So, but what do you
Yep.
think about that?
So I think there are like I have two takes on this. The first one is that founders should be the PM until they're confident that this product could scale, like the core product could scale, and you should only hire a PM when you're ready to like go to the next level. So for example, expanding to a new platform, say launching a new mobile app, or like entering a new region, or launching a completely new different set of feature. But when you're still working on one core, I believe that the founder should just stick being a PM on your own, because transferring the whole context is a pretty big, chunk of work that I don't think lots of people would realize until they start hiring a PM, and then like it doesn't work because they don't have the context that I do, right? So I would stick to be my own PM and as long as possible until we're ready to like go to the next level. But the second thing I have is that PM itself, I believe, should not be an entry level role. It should be like, say, you have some experience first being a data person, design engineer, and then you transition to be a PM or business person, CS, whatever. But you have to have a hands-on experience on something first, then you become a PM. Because one of the biggest mistake I see lots of founders do is that because they don't want to deal with like Jira ticket moving around, they hire associate PM just to move the Jira tickets for them and write PRDs for them. That is not what PM are supposed to be, right? PM should be helping you
Yep.
figure out the right things to do and what are the things you should not build. And if you're not even sure on doing that, then you should, not even bother hiring, right? So the second take is that do not hire like a associate level, especially for early stage startup, because it should be when you're ready to
Yeah.
scale, not to solve your basics problem as a yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it could go either way, right? Because if you hire someone like too senior, then like they want more like kind of responsibility for like setting the vision of the product, which should actually be like the founder's responsibility, right? So actually, it's kind of hard to. I've seen so many times when startups hire like a senior product person, right, or like let's say a VP of product or a head of product, and then they just end up butting heads with the founder, and then it just ruins everything, right? So I think it's really tricky to know when you should actually try to hire like your PM, right? And I totally agree with you about like the spectrum of quality of PMs, right? There are PMs that are basically glorified like admins, right? Who are just like kind of like moving tickets and stuff like that. But then there are a lot of amazing, talented like product managers in Indonesia that can really impact your product, right, in a meaningful way. And I think this transitions into my next question, right? I personally believe that Indonesia has some of the best product talent, right? A lot of people would disagree with this statement, by the way. But there are PMs here in Indonesia that are building for millions of users, right? But they get like a bad rap, right? Because I think partly because I think that the market in Indonesia is not as big as everyone thinks it is, right? And finding product market fit is more elusive than you think. So then a lot of times you say, oh, like this product manager didn't do a good job. They didn't find product market fit, or they can't, build this awesome product. But, the reality is that like, sometimes the market is just not there, right? And they're forced into those positions. But what do you think is the biggest misconception about building product in Indonesia and, perhaps like product managers in Indonesia?
The main thing on top of my head I can think of is that they set the wrong OKR for years in this industry. So I think I remember 2014 to 2020, I think people's OKR were still about like DAU, MAU, how many people are registering,
Right.
downloading. Even as a PM, that was still your goal. And essentially that's the cause of like all this vanity, like wrong goal to begin with, that caused people to not know what exactly to prioritize on, right? So those era was essentially the cause of the problem, in my opinion, not necessarily because it's a bad PM, but because we were focusing on like somehow a very vanity metric. Then the whole industry was kind of like flipped to the wrong side as well. But I think it started course corrected several years, like in the past 2 or 3 years. Then we start thinking about revenue. How do we grow more sustainably, scalably? And PMs have been forced to think like, how do you make it even sharper? And your resource is not unlimited, right? Back then in the DAU era I mentioned, PMs have unlimited resource as well. Like I can see PMs who've been working with like 12 engineers, for example, building a growth hacking product that is just a copy paste of what the competitors are doing for the sake of it. So this kind of thing is indeed there. And so I understand where the bad rap is coming from. And sometimes people cannot even say that, look, what I did was shitty for the sake of it. But I think they should, because it was not a good era where we're focusing on the wrong things, right? So now the key thing is that how can they shift the mindset to really build for something more sustainable and scalable, right? So this is where I see like lots of PM actually struggle. Lots of product teams actually really struggle as well to incorporate more financial metrics, more tangible business metrics to their day to day. And I think some survive and some does not, and that's the reality, right? So what I would like to say is that yes, it is tough. There are bad traps, and maybe most of them are not wrong, but there are good sides as well. Those who are surviving, those who are learning from it, are thriving, are also like, say some of them are working in like abroad companies right now, or are still around, making sure that whatever the rest of the product is still surviving and thriving. So it's not that the whole industry is dead just because there's some bad, practices that have happened in the past.
Hmm.
So, and again, Indonesia is a very big country. There's so many PMs as well. So just because you've seen some bad samples doesn't mean that the whole, environment is bad, right? So, and last but not least is that being a PM is also to be able to nourish the failures that we made. Because I mean, even in my case, many of my products are no longer there. Like, I built line today at
Right.
line. The application is not even there anymore. Like it's dead. It's kill it, right? I
Mm,
built a lot of experiments that grabs home screen feed. I think 90% of them is
mm,
not even there. But does that make me a bad PM?
mm,
Perhaps not. If I can explain why it's no longer working or relevant at that time. So this
mm,
culture of like shaming mistake just because it happened once is the one that I think should stop, and we should see it in a bigger picture. How can someone get back up and build again, regardless of whatever is going to happen
mm.
in the future? Yeah, so that's sorry, it's a bit
Yeah.
long.
No, that's great. I think it's you touched on some awesome points there. I also agree, right? I do think that the role of product is, at the end of the day, it's a predictor of revenue, right? Like it is. That's all it is, right? Can it? Can you actually predict what your revenue is like going forward, because of your conversion
Yeah.
rates or retention? So I think once PMs realize that, then they'll know that okay, like then they'll figure out okay, this is how I should build product, right? Um, Touching on more about like PMs joining early stage startups, right? If you had to coach a PM who is going to join an early stage startup, and this is something I see a lot, right? Where obviously some of our clients, right, they want to hire the best PMs, and then we try to get PMs from the big name companies in Indonesia, let's say Tokopedia, Grab, and whatnot, and then they join this early stage environment, and they're kind of like um, uh, yeah, maybe they're challenged, right? They don't know how to kind of operate. Could you share a little bit of advice to
Yeah.
them, how they can better be the company in an early stage environment?
Yes. So number one is actually focusing on outcome, not outputs, because lots of times in bigger companies you are tied with the outputs, what you need to ship. But in earlier stage, you are tied with the outcome. Does it even matter, and does it grow your revenue or not, right? So when you shift that mindset, the three things I would recommend is to really touch the basics again. In big companies, there's someone doing user research for you. There's someone doing data analysis for you. There's someone handling the financials on your product, right? These three basics that I just mentioned is something you need to do yourself, especially. So talk to your own customer, digest it yourself, and try to really project it your way, whether it's going to be financially make sense or not. And those are the three key skills I think you need, many of big companies PM need to relearn in order to survive and thrive in earlier stage environment. Because even until today, I still talk to my own users. I do my own
Mm,
interviews. I analyze my own data, see all the traffic directly, and understand what does this mean. And then I try to project it myself as well. Like, how is it going to eventually impact our future revenue? Does building this make sense in the long term, right? So these are super basic, but are already been delegated in bigger environment. So make sure to reacquire the skills. And I think those are the three basics that can help you survive.
yeah. Um, yeah, we made a mistake with that early on in my previous company where we hired a PM too early, and they were kind of like in charge of getting insights, right? And
Hmm.
the problem was that like secondhand insights is actually like useless. It's like worthless, right?
Yeah.
Because you have like confirmation bias, right? You kind of nitpick on like what this person is telling you, right? The insight that they're telling you, sometimes you don't believe it. So I think it's really important for founders to continue to talk to users, continue to kind of like build their own insights without having to rely on someone else like collecting them for them, right? Which leads me to the last question here today is more around like advice to PMs or to other tech executives who want to make a jump into founding a company like you have, right? What advice you think you have? What advice you have for them who are like kind of thinking or on the edge of wanting to do this?
Hmm. I think first of all is again, like I personally have tried to do this 3, 4 times in my career, and not only until situations brought me to an edge, I finally do it. Just to share, like when I was at Grab, I interviewed. I went to like YC for interview and like didn't make
Mm,
it. I flew to the US. Three of my friends, and just like you know what, they didn't decided to invest, and I'm like that's fine. But I
mm,
did that several times, like try to like jump in, but it never really worked because I was trying to jump in instead
mm,
of things are coming around and eventually push me to do so. So sometimes when you're ready, things
mm,
will come into place. Maybe your life will turn somehow. You don't have to be fired in Japan like me, but
mm,
maybe there's gonna be like situation that will push you to that moment. Maybe you meet your friends again, and then when time is right. You don't have to force it. It's a little bit weird. It's a bit like a like farting. If you force it too hard, it might go wrong, but it just flow by.
right.
So don't force it too much. Is my advice.
Yep.
When the moment is right, and also in this market, rethink about it. Are you really ready? Are there really strong problem you want to solve, or are you just trying to do it for the sake of it, right?
Mm,
Because realistically, in this market, it's also hard to not only, for example, get another job in product management, or start something to begin with, right? So it has to be coming from a very strong background. So hope that makes sense. To really think about it as if you're trying to launch a product for your own company anyway, right? Start
mm,
with all the no's of like why it doesn't make sense until you eventually, wait, you know what, it makes sense. Let's prioritize this, right? So do the
mm.
PMing as well for this decision. So
Yeah.
hopefully that the answers.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you should spend time definitely building conviction around what you want to do, right? And almost to the point where like you almost have to do it, and you can't like live without doing it. And then that's probably the right time to actually do the thing. But thanks, Dilla. I think that's all the time we have today. If anyone is looking for a visa, spun.global, right, is the place to check Spun out. If you want to reach out to Dilla, you can reach out to her on LinkedIn, or reach out to me and I can make an introduction. But thanks again, Dilla. All the best building up Spun.